Today, I'm going to discuss about my thesis proposal titled Cultural Approach Analysis of Indonesian Children's Literature Anthology Translation. My talk will be divided into 7 segments. The first is the background of the study, second, formulation of the problem, third, objectives of the research, fourth, conceptual framework and related studies, fifth, analytical construct, sixth, research method, and seventh, or last, is the example of data analysis. To begin with, the background of the study states that the children's literatures are written works complemented with illustrations in order to entertain or instruct young people, and its genre consists of a vast variety of works. Children's literature itself is a vast collection of texts with numerous sources, addressees, types, genres, forms, as well as functions. Its sources encompass folklore, generally, such as folk and fairy tales, which is initially intended for adults and subsequently adjusted to children readership, stated by O'Sullivan in 2019, as cited in Posian in 2022. This type of literature is addressed from infants to young adults, and adults assume the role sometimes as readers or mediators to these all age materials. Children are originally the target group. However, this view shifts to the extent that both children and adults are the readers of children's literature, since adults assume the functions required for the production and distribution of children's literature, namely editors, publishers, parents, educators, and etc. Children's literature is a literary work that allows them to understand spectrums and cultural life, encouraging them to a globalized point of view. Children are allowed to better understand life in other cultures via literature. So, an intercultural exchange can be cultivated. The literary text itself aids children to develop their characters and soft skills as to improve the transfer of knowledge through generation gaps. Moving on to the formulation of the problem, there are three problems I would like to discuss here. The first is what cultural specific items are found in the source text. Second is how translation strategies are applied to translate the cultural terms in the local language to Indonesian into English. Third is which ideology is the most applied in the translation process. In relation to the objective of the research, the objectives are arranged based on the problem of the study. So I tried to find out the answers to those questions by first to identify what cultural specific items are found in the source text. Second is to highlight which translation strategies accommodate the cultural exchange in the local language Indonesian into English. Third is to determine which ideology is the most applied in the translation process. As per the research significance, the theoretical benefits consist of the contribution to a better grasp of the complex relationship elements of otherness in children's books and explore the potential to cultivate preservation of domestic concepts. Also, translation strategies are specifically implemented to deliver non-equivalent messages, highlighting the field of cultural translation studies. As per the practical benefits, the study provides English literature students with an in-depth insight of culture-specific items and how to translate them. This research will serve translators in the field of children's literature adequately, as it sheds on the ideology identity stance in the production of children's literature. Proceeding to the conceptual framework. As for the analysis, I will analyze the information through narratives in form of sentences or phrases. According to the reference identification, I will identify the references found in a specific expression that are later categorized by a taxonomy. Proceeding to the translation strategies as proposed by Mona Baker, they consist of the cultural substitution, translating using related or non-related words, translation with loanword or with loanword without explanations, omissions, or by illustration. Lastly, I will determine the whole series of translation process based on the foreignization or domestication category. In relation to the previous studies conducted as the primary scopes of my study, this research addresses the previous studies with corresponding relevance. The first is a study titled Culture-Specific Items in Literary Texts and the Translation Based on Foreignization and Domestication Strategies. The second is foreignization or domestication, the ideology of translating Balinese culture words in novel Sukreni Gadis Bali. The third is an analysis of ideology in translation on bilingual storybook for children. The analytical construct you can see here is the construct from the top to bottom, starting from the data, which is the anthology of children's literature. Then you find yourself in the source language from Bahasa Indonesia to target language in English. The first step to conduct is to identify the references, then categorize them based on the culture-specific items by Newmark's proposed theory, starting from ecology, public life, social life, personal life, custom and pursuits, lastly, private passions. The second step of analysis is the non-equivalent strategies by Mona Baker in 2018. For example, the strategy by cultural substitution, omission, illustration, paraphrase using unrelated or related word, neutral or less expressive word, translation by a more general word or superordinate. Finally, I will determine the result of the analysis of the translation based on Vanity's proposed theory for Indonesian or domestication, whether the translation itself is source language oriented or target language oriented. As for the research method, the type of this research is considered descriptive qualitative research, or it will utilize descriptive qualitative. The research instrument consists of the researcher and the data. The data source will focus on sentences and phrases in the anthology of Indonesian children's literature, while the data analysis technique utilizes categorization and taxonomy. Moving on, data collection in qualitative descriptive research focuses on identifying the nature of specific events during study. In collecting the data for this research, the research performs several steps. The first is to read the storybooks thoroughly. Thereafter, the writer compares the source text and the target text entirely. Second of all, the researcher makes notes on which phrases, clauses, or sentences from source text that highlights culture-specific items or references. The third is to have the researcher mark the phrases, clauses, or sentences from the target text and their cultural translation approaches applied in the target text. The fourth is to have the researcher classify the phrases, clauses, or sentences according to the type of the ideologies. Eventually, the researcher assesses the translation comparison of the data. Here is the first example of data analysis. In the source text, the sentence Andin terbangun di atas biduk, etc. is translated to she awakens and finds herself on a small boat in the target text. The phrase biduk is specifically identifiable as a small boat that points out to the reference to a means of transportation, accounting for the category of social life by Newmark's taxonomy. As for the translation strategy, the idea to translate biduk to a small boat is because the means of biduk in the source culture is not compatible to kayak or rowing boat. Therefore, the strategy of using unrelated word represents the small boat to the readers as to preserve understandability instead of preserving the word biduk with explanations. Therefore, this ideology upholds domestication ideology. The second example of data analysis in this first phrase or sentence is only stated in the source text without further information, and the target text carries the exact quotation to the readers as to preserve the reference of a culture via song, prayers, or spiritual rites. So the readers are expected to learn that this phrase refers to the song, prayers, or spiritual rites, accounting for the category of customs and pursuits based on Newmark's taxonomy. Regarding the translation strategy, the strategy applied is loanword with explanation strategy in the target text because it attempts to preserve the phrase Parung Simardago for the target readers with additional elaboration by the phrase which means one tap can fill an entire basket. This is evident that the clarity to the reference of the culture is present. Otherwise, the quoted reference, the Parung Simadago, will fail to deliver new information to the readers by loan word only. Therefore, the ideology presented here is foreignization. The third example of data analysis, the phrase lumber reference in the source text attempts to inform the target reader with an item relating to the category of personal life, specifically food. Due to the absence of lumber as a food reference in the source culture, the item itself is not omitted or substituted with other culturally equivalent references in the target culture. The strategy applied for lumber in source text is loanword to the target text without explanation because the addition of context to the item will likely to burden the target text translation with repetitive descriptions for each item, while the rest of the translation can still describe lumber via other sentences or phrases, even context. As a result, this ideology states the circumstance of foreignization. As a recap, the reference of lumber in the source culture and the target culture can still be sustained. Therefore, this concludes the discussion of my thesis proposal. Should you have any questions, do not hesitate to drop them in the comment section below. Thank you, everyone.